Good day, students. As you know, we've had a student strike at TUT, and in order for us not to get behind in the introduction to project management, I've decided to record the session that we would have had this evening for those of you that are on the evening class, or the session that you would have had during the block class on Friday. So please sit back, watch the slides. The slides are also available for download on my tutor. So if you want to download them so that you can make notes on them while you watch the presentation, you're welcome to do that. Okay, so you will see in the slides there are points where I ask you to pause and then to go and do the assignments, the assessments that I've put onto my tutor. There are multiple choice questions which you need to answer before you can continue with the next slides. The reason I've put the multiple choice questions in is so that you have a opportunity to test yourself and to see whether you're understanding the material. In the next class, we will then not go through the theory, but just discuss some of the main implications of the theory, and specifically then look at how we are going to plan the career day for Kliptown. So for the block students, I haven't given you that assignment yet, but you will be doing a career day at Kliptown, and I will put you into groups and give you your topics the next time I see you. Right, so for today's lecture, the outcomes and the assessment criteria are here. You will see that outcomes and assessment criteria are relatively similar. They just worded in using different order of words. So I'm only going to go through the outcomes. So for the outcomes, you must be able to determine the life cycle for a project, determine the life cycle for a product, distinguish between a project portfolio and program management, describe project management processes, and then define project management knowledge areas. Okay, so let's start here at the very beginning and say, why is it that we do project management? And why are there certain standardized tools and techniques of project management that we teach you in this course and which we encourage you to use in your work environment? The main reasons are that when projects are things or work that we get given by customers to do for them. And at the end of the day, we have to meet the need that the customer had. So here you can see a cartoon of a typical interaction that will happen. So in the first one, this is what the customer explained. So the customer said, I need a swing and it has to look like this and it has to hang on my tree. But because there's communication that's happening between the customer and the project leader, and if this communication is not done properly and isn't documented properly, a misunderstanding can happen in the head of the project leader. So here you can see this is what the project leader understood, and already you can see that this swing is definitely not going to work. Then the next step is what the analyst designed and what the programmer wrote, and then how the business consultant described it. Normally business consultants are the ones that will sell the client something that's bigger and better, and will also sell the client something which the project team is unable to implement. So as a project manager, one has to be careful in managing what your business consultant is telling the customer. Then throughout the project life cycle, there are certain important things that one has to do, and one of them is documentation. And in the case of our tree and swing project, you can see that there was no documentation. This is what operations installed. So at the end of the day, this is the product that was delivered to the client, and you can see it's just a rope that's tied to the tree. And then, of course, this is how we build the customer. So we build the customer for a whole roller coaster when we only gave them a rope that is hanging on a tree. And then lastly, this is how it was supported. So when a problem came along, the tree was just chopped down. And the way that the project is supported is directly correlated to the way that the project is documented at the end of the day. And lo and behold, this is what the customer really needed. So what we try and teach you in project management is to start with what the customer requirement is and what the customer really needs, and then hopefully to deliver on that need that the customer has at the end of the day. Okay, so just a little bit of history on projects. Projects are as old as the human race. In 2540 before Christ, the Great Pyramid was built. So this was the big projects that were undertaken by the Egyptians as tombs for their pharaohs. Then the Parthenon in Greece was built between 448 and 432 BC. BC is before Christ. And the Great Wall of China, which must have been quite a large project as well, was built in 7 before Christ. And then the Mayan temples in South America were built between 200 and 900 after Christ. So you can see that big construction projects have been with us for many, many years as a human race. Then in the recent history of project management, it started in around 1958 when a lot of articles on project management started to be published in journals. Then in 1961, system managers were appointed at IBM, and system managers had very similar jobs to what current project managers have. Then in 1960, and you will note that the space race and going to the moon and all of that happened in about the late 1950s, early 1960s. Another factor that will have influenced this is the World War II, because radar systems and new aircraft and landing craft and submarines and things like that were built during World War II. There was also a large focus on building infrastructure in the United States, and a lot of the work that was done in those projects were then written up in the articles on project management. So then in 1969, 5 volunteers came together and they founded the Project Management Institute. So Project Management Institute is one of the institutes that has a standardized body of knowledge and tries to capture what project management is about and how it should be done and what are the best practices. And you can then see by the growth in the PMI how it has grown exponentially from 1969, when there were 5 volunteers, up to 2011, where PMI had over 500,000 members in 185 countries. So that's just one of the ways in which we can measure project management. Another way would be to look at the articles that are published. At the moment, there are 2 main journals in project management: the Project Management Journal, which is published by PMI, and then the International Journal of Project Management, which is published by the UK Association for Project Managers. So yeah, so project management is with us and is here to stay, and is something which all of us need to be able to do. So in line with the history of project management, in the beginning of project management, you found that most of the literature and most of the projects that were being done were in construction, engineering, space, and defense. And a lot of the tools and techniques that we still use to this day were developed in these industries. But since the 1990s, there has been a shift in project management, and project management is no longer just the realm of the so-called hard sciences, but you will also now find large projects in banking. Even movies use project management for the development and making of the movies. Events, something like the FIFA World Cup, was managed as a project. And IT also has large projects for implementation of new IT systems, programming, development of new software. Something like Microsoft Office is developed using project management tools and techniques. Okay, so I've now told you about the history of project management, but now you will ask me, but what is a project? What is this animal called a project that we have spoken about? So the main characteristics of a project is as follows. The first thing is it's planned. So that means that it is not an endeavor that we just undertake. It is something that we sit down and we plan before we start it. Inherent in the plan, it is temporary. So it has a fixed start and a fixed end date. So from this you can see that a project could be a day or it could be 10 years. As long as it is temporary and it has a fixed start and a fixed end date. Then the next thing about a project is that it has to be unique. So if I am producing forks and I have a factory that every day produces exactly the same fork day in and day out, that is not a project. That is operations, that is ongoing and repetitive. To be a project, it has to be unique. So in other words, if I, as a crafter, am taking forks and I'm making each fork into something unique, that then would be a project. And then the last thing is a project must have a complete and definite outcome. Now the outcome of a project can be a product. So let's take the example, our fork example. If I was to design and manufacture or build the factory that is making the forks, my product is then that factory. So you will see that a product can also be produced by operations or management, because I also produce a product which is a fork when I use the factory and I repetitively make forks every day. But for a product, or sorry, for a project, that product is unique. Then another output of a project can also be a service. So for example, if I want to improve business processes in my organization, I can start a project that has the goal of improving those processes, which is then a service which I render at the end of the day. Right, and we need to talk a little bit more about the complete and definite outcome. So it depends at what level one sits in the manufacturing chain. So if I am designing this PC board that goes into a cell phone, my complete and definite outcome would be this PC board, which I will then deliver as the product at the end of the day. Whereas if I am Samsung and I am busy developing a cell phone, I will use the product from that somebody else has designed, and I will incorporate it into my complete and definite outcome, which will then be a cell phone. Another thing to realize, as we've already spoken about, updating of processes, in other words, putting a new service in place, is also a project. And at the end of the day, very often the output of a project can also be documentation. For example, if at the CSIR the client asks us to do a study on what the latest technology out there is in terms of bricks, and what are the newest ceramic technologies, and what are the advantages of each of these technologies, etc., etc. At the end of the day, they will pay us a lot of money, but all that we will deliver is a document. Okay, so after that, the formal definition of what is a project, as in the PMBOK 4th edition, it hasn't changed actually to the 5th edition. A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. And next week we will talk about projects and what is a project and what isn't a project in more detail in class as well. Okay, then just to make it clear, operations management falls outside the scope of formal project management. So this is the area of management where we have the ongoing production of goods and services. Operations management ensures that business operations continue efficiently, and it's concerned with a process that transforms inputs into outputs. And so it has something in common with project management in that operations management also uses planning as one of its tools, and operations also use resources in the form of people and materials as inputs. But at the end of the day, operations are not unique because we are doing the same thing over and over again. Operations are not temporary because they don't have a definite start and definite end date. And operations do give us a product or service, but the product or service is not a unique product or service. Okay, so projects intersect with operations at the following points. So when we close out a phase, and we will talk about that more when we talk about project life cycles just now, developing new products, upgrading a product, expanding outputs. So if I want my factory to make a new type of glass, say I've been making drinking glasses, but now I want to start making wine glasses, I will then institute a project that will change my factory or upgrade my factory so that I can now produce the new product. Or if I want to make more drinking glasses every day, I will then have to have a product where I upgrade my factory in order to expand my outputs. Projects can also be used for improving operations or product development processes. And at the end of the product life cycle, we also then will go over to a project again, because that is when we will dispose of the product. So say for example the product was the factory where we made wine glasses. The factory has now gotten to the end of its life. So in other words, we cannot maintain the equipment and machinery in the factory any longer. So we now say this is the end of the factory's life. So then we go over to a disposal phase where we have a project where people will come in and remove the machinery, and at the end of the day we might even break down the building and put in a garden or whatever. So that is the disposal phase of the product, which then becomes a project again. Okay, so I've put these figures in because I've found that these are actually quite good illustrations to show you the difference between production and project work. So on the left hand side here we have the project work, which is temporary, unique, and done by project teams. So now what happens is when we want to increase efficiency and reduce production costs, we then go over to production line work, and this is now where it becomes ongoing and repetitive, and it's done by the production department. So remember that picture of our fork, the unique fork. We can take the forks and we can give it to a project team, and they will then make sure that each fork that comes out looks unique. But we can then decide to increase efficiency, and we can say, okay, it doesn't really matter that each fork looks completely unique, as long as it looks like the unique fork in the picture, we are happy. So then we change it into production line, and we then have a machine that distorts each fork in an ongoing repetitive manner. Alright, then if we look at projects and production on a sales and marketability continuum, you will see we have a unique project that gives us different products which are bespoke or custom built. So this is where, if we take the example of a motorcycle, if you want a unique motorcycle where the handlebars are custom made to fit exactly to the size of your hands, and the height of the seat is adjusted exactly and then attached exactly at the height that suits you, that would then be a custom built or bespoke product. Whereas on the other side, if we are just making Suzuki motorbikes, they will be mass produced, they will just come off the production line, they will be similar products. So each bike that comes off the production line will be exactly the same as the previous one. So bespoke is when we talk about making clothes. So if you go to a tailor and the tailor measures you up individually and makes a suit especially for you, that's a bespoke suit. Whereas on the other side we have off the peg. So this is where you go to Mr. Price and you buy a suit, and it doesn't fit you 100% because your arms are maybe a little bit longer than my arms or whatever, but it fits good enough, and that is where you have the standard model. So now in the example of the motorcycles, you will now have a standard Suzuki, which is 50cc, which has standard handlebars, it has a standard height from the ground, everything is standard. Whereas on this side you had a custom built motorcycle which is made especially for you. Okay, then on the risk and uncertainty continuum, you can see that project work is high risk because there is considerable change. So if I go from one project to the next project, I'm not doing the same thing. It is unique. So there is change. That means that you need increased communication between the stakeholders and especially in the project team. You need increased documentation because you have to document exactly what happened on the project, why were the decisions made, and how were the decisions made, and what were the decisions. And you need high monitoring and control because you need to, on a regular basis, know what the status of the project is, how much money has been spent, how are we doing in terms of schedule, how are we doing in terms of risk, etc., etc. Whereas on the production side, it's low risk because we now have a process that works. We have a factory that is making the forks. It is on a production line. There is little or no change because each product that comes out is the same as the previous product. So I don't have to change as I go along because I'm doing exactly the same thing. You need less communication because everybody already knows what they have to do. If you've trained somebody to know how to operate a certain machine to make a certain component, you don't have to on a daily basis tell them again, this is how you do it. Whereas on a project, you need more communication because of the fact that things change. You also need less documentation. You just need the standard documentation that says how something must be made. And you need low monitor and controlling because everybody knows what they should be doing, and all that you need to do is you need to measure the output at the end of the day. So you don't have to monitor and control the costs and the schedule and so on because your risk is low. You know what you're making, you know how long it takes to make something, and you know what it will cost you. Whereas on the project side, it is a lot more uncertain. Alright, so I would like you to pause this video over here and then go to my tutor and do the assessment called What is a Project? Okay, so maybe I must just show you quickly. If you go to my tutor, alright, so you can just type in this address, http://mytutor.tut.ac.za/ and then it will take you to this login screen. The first time you log in, your username is your student number and your password is also your student number. And when you log in the first time, it will ask you to change your password. Alright, so when you log in, you will then find all the subjects that you have registered for listed, and you then go to Project Management Process 4A, and on the left hand side you will see there is a tab called Assessments. So if you click on Assessments, it will then take you to the two assessments that we have for this module or for this theme. So what is a project is the one that I want you to do now. You will see that the test can be saved and resumed later. You need to finish it by next Monday night, and I have developed it in the mobiles application, so you should be able to use it on mobile devices. So you can just click begin, and then you will see there are various multiple choice questions that you need to complete. Please remember that you must save your answer, because if you don't save an answer and you exit the test, then your answer will be lost and you will have to redo the answer. Okay, so I'm busy finalizing the study guide, but 10% of your individual mark will come from the marks that you obtain in doing these assessments that we will do throughout the semester. Okay, so I hope you did well in your what is a project assessment. So now that we know what a project is, what is project management? So project management is management to accomplish project goals. That's in a nutshell. But if we look at the extended definition, it is management to define and execute everything necessary to complete a complex system of tasks. Achieve project end results that might be unique and unfamiliar, and do it by a target completion date with constrained resources, with an organization that is cross-functional and newly formed. Alright, so let's just talk about some of these terms that we have over here. So, by nature, projects are complex. That is because we are doing things that are unfamiliar and unique, and we want to complete them within a certain time, and we have constrained resources. And the constrained resources can be in terms of the monetary resources that are available to us. It can be in terms of the human resources, so the skills and competencies of the human resources that we have available, or it can be in terms of the materials or equipment that we have available to us. Then an interesting thing to realize over here is that when we start a project, we actually start a new organization, because it is very seldom that a project team will be formed and work together for the next 50 years. Normally what happens is, when we know what the project is about, we will then say, okay, we need a system engineer, we need obviously a project manager, we need 2 programmers, we need 1 electronic engineer, and we need 2 draftsmen, for example. So already by saying that, you can see that it's cross-functional, because it's different functional areas that I've been talking about. I spoke about electronic engineering, systems engineering, drafting, project management. So those are all different functions that happen in an organization. And because we then put those people together in a project team, we now have a newly formed organization. And because of the fact that every time we start a project, we form a new organization, there are certain challenges that we have to face. And in this course, we will talk more, or in the BTech Project Management, we will talk more about what the challenges are of this newly formed organization, not just in this module, but in some of the other modules as well. Okay, so where do we typically need project management? So where the work is unfamiliar. The job is different from the ordinary and routine. It requires that different things be done, the same things be done differently, or both. Alright, so this is where the uniqueness of it comes in, because when we are doing production and we are making the same fork from day to day, we don't need project management, because what we are doing is not unfamiliar. So if we want to build a UFO like this one, then we will need project management, because the principles of how this UFO stays in the air are already unfamiliar to us, because the aircraft that we design don't look like that. Okay, where we require greater effort, we also need project management. So the job requires more resources, people, capital, equipment, etc., than are normally employed by the department or organization. This, for example, is one of those islands that they've built off Dubai. Now, you can see that what they did was they reclaimed the land with this project, and each of the houses here then has its own landing from which it can launch boats, etc. So if you think about the effort required in this project, they needed people that came from many functional disciplines. You needed civil engineers, you need land reclamation people, you need architects to design the whole thing, you need electrical engineers to install, because just think of the complexity of installing electricity to all of the homes that are built on these islands. You need maritime specialists, because what are you doing to the by erecting these houses over here, what are you doing to the sea patterns, and what's going to happen if storms come along, etc., etc. Then, of course, the capital required to build this would have been very significant, and also the equipment, because you now can't just use a normal bulldozer to dig your foundations, because you are reclaiming the land first, and so you would need very specialized equipment to make this project happen. Right, then where there is a changing environment, the industry environment involves high innovation, high competition, rapid product change, shifting markets, etc., etc. Here I've shown the example of tablets. Now, if you think back to 5 years ago, the tablets that you had then were basically just modified laptop computers. And if you now and then as the tablets developed, they went through innovation, they've become lighter. The first tablets didn't have internet connectivity, and now we have internet connectivity. We can connect other devices using USB to our tablets. We can even connect external keyboards. They've become lighter, more power efficient, etc., etc. So the organizations that work, for example, in the tablet industry, have project teams that work very closely together and make sure that they stay at the bleeding edge and that they stay ahead of the competition. Because if their project is not completed on time, they lose market share. And so that is why we use projects when there is a changing environment. Okay, so where we need multifunctional effort, the job relates lateral relationships between the areas to coordinate and expedite work and reconcile conflicts. So here I've given the example of the Gautrain. If you think about the implementation of the Gautrain, the different types of functions that would have been required would have been the architects that would have designed the buildings around the Gautrain, the railway engineers that would have designed the rails, they would have designed the railway cars, you know, everything that had to do with the train itself. Then you had the civil works, to build the rails, to build the infrastructure required. You can see on this picture, this train is powered by electricity, so you needed electrical engineers to actually implement this whole network. The train itself is electronic, and although it has a driver, most of its controls are electronically based, so you need electronic engineers to make the project happen. And then, of course, in line with this Gautrain, there was also the rapid bus transit system, so that had to be arranged and planned. And so you can see that project management was used on the Gautrain because of the fact that there were so many functions or specialities that had to be brought together. Okay, then the other place where you would need project management is where you could impact the reputation of the organization or other stakeholders. Failure to satisfactorily complete the work could result in financial ruin, loss of market share, damaged reputation, loss of future contracts, or other problems for the stakeholders or larger environment. So I think in the South African scenario, a good example of where project management was not done correctly and has impacted the reputation of the organization is Sunroll with the new road system and the whole e-tolling project. I think all of us would agree that the road system is great, but the stakeholder management, especially in terms of the implementation of e-tolls, was very badly done. And that is why we all still are very upset and people are striking because of the fact that this implementation was done very badly. Okay, so then in project management, we also have a project hierarchy, where we would look at something like the reconstruction and development program, and the highest level of that would be a program. But now remember that above the reconstruction and development program, we also have a portfolio, which is the portfolio of the minister that is in charge of the reconstruction and development program, because that's not the only thing that that minister does. Then underneath the RDP program, we will then have house building programs, which would then be sub-programs, because part of the RDP was also implementation of electricity and sanitation, etc., etc. But the house building programs would be a sub-program. Then we would say that the houses that we built in a certain township would be a project. So build houses in Kalafong or Katlehong would be a project. Then to build a specific house for a specific individual would then be the sub-project. And then to install electricity in that individual's house would then be a work package. And to fit the electric lights, which is part of the install electricity in house A, would then be an activity. And a work package is also known as a cost account or a task. Okay, so this is just to show you, this comes out of the PMBOK, how portfolios, projects and programs are made up and interact with each other. So if we look at the highest level portfolio, so this would be, in our RDP example, the portfolio of the minister who is responsible for the RDP program. And you will see that at the highest level, there will be strategies and priorities, progressive elaboration, governance, disposition on requested changes, impacts from changes in other portfolios, programs, and projects that will need to be taken into account at the highest level portfolio. This highest level portfolio will then be broken down into lower level portfolios. The lower level portfolio will then be broken down into higher level programs and lower level programs, and then into projects. Okay. And you will see that from the portfolio to the program, there's always these strategies and priorities, progressive elaboration, etc., etc. Now, a portfolio can be made up of lower level portfolios, programs, and projects. So here are programs and projects. All right, so the project will then give back to the high-level portfolio performance reports, change requests with impact on other portfolio programs or projects. And the same thing then happens in terms of the programs. And then at the end of the day, in order to understand the difference between projects, programs, and portfolios, you need to study this table. I'm not going to go through it in detail because I know all of you can read. But if we look, for example, at the scopes, projects have defined objectives. Scope is progressively elaborated throughout the project life cycle, whereas programs have larger scope and provide more significant benefits, because programs is where we put several projects together that have the same benefits, we put them together so that we can get larger benefits because they deal with the same items. And then portfolios have a business scope that changes with the strategic goals of the organization. So if we change our organizational strategy, then our portfolio and how we put the portfolio together will change. And you can go through all of these in terms of change, planning, management, success, and monitoring. Okay, so then when we look at a project, projects have a three-dimensional goal, or in some literature it is also called constraints. So it's quality, time, and cost. So when we look at the three-dimensional goal, what is more important, quality, time, or cost? Well, if I'm flying in an aeroplane and I'm sitting up there at 10,000 feet, I sincerely hope that quality was the most important criteria which was taken into account when building the aeroplane. Otherwise, it will crash, and I wouldn't really like to die so young. Right, then if we look at something like RDP housing, the government wants to supply as many houses to as many people as possible, so they want to do it at the lowest cost. And then the last thing is, if we want to build a bridge, for example, well, this is the example of the Nelson Mandela Bridge, which had to be completed by a certain date. Time then becomes the most important factor. Because if, for example, you think about the stadia that were built for the 2010 World Cup, you know, the stadium, the Soccer City Stadium in Soweto is a beautiful stadium, but if it wasn't completed in time for the opening match, and say, for example, they ran out of time and they couldn't put the seats in, it would have been a complete failure as a project, because the most important thing was that it had to be on time. So when we look at the three-dimensional goal, or the three constraints of projects, which one is the most important will depend on the project. So we will, for each project, have a project priority matrix where we will decide which of the three is fixed. So this is the main constraint. Then we will decide which one do we want to enhance or optimize. So if we have to take decisions, given the fact that the cost is fixed, which one are we then going to give preference to, time or performance? And then which one are we just going to accept? So let's look at this example. This example is where we maybe want to build a house for a millionaire. So the millionaire says to us, the most important thing is performance. The house has to have gold taps, it has to have electric fencing around, it has to have a fancy 7-car garage, and I don't want to have to reverse out, so you need to build a turntable in front of the garage so that I can just reverse out and then it will turn my car around. So performance is the most important thing, and I'm prepared to discuss the cost with you. So I'm prepared to give you a little bit more money, but if you make decisions and it's between having or paying more money and having it done on time, I would that you rather make take the option that is cheaper. So for example, I'm insistent on my gold-plated taps, so you might have to import my gold-plated taps, but because we can accept a slippage in time, you don't have to fly them in, you can wait for them to be shipped in, which takes longer. Right, so that is your project priority matrix. Then here is another example. So this would be the example of the Soccer City Stadium. The main constraint, the fixed constraint, was time. So if the stadium was not completed by June 2010, the project would have been a complete success. I mean, a complete failure. So any decisions that we took in terms of the Soccer City Stadium, time was of the essence. Then we wanted to optimize or enhance performance, because we can't have the stadium collapse or the seats collapse. So we wanted to optimize the performance. We wanted to make sure that the stadium could be used for soccer matches and rugby matches, etc., etc. And then the trade-off that we then have to accept is that when we make decisions to get the project done on time or with the performance that we need, we have to accept that it might cost us more than we planned for. Okay, so I hope this makes sense, and I want you as an individual to start thinking about your project priority matrix for your project, which is going to be the sorry, I've now lost my train of thought which is going to be the career day in Soweto. So I want you to think about what is going to be fixed, what are you going to optimize, and what are you going to accept in terms of this career day. And we will talk about this in our next class. Right, so the next thing we want to talk about is project management process groups. So these are the process groups according to the project management body of knowledge. So in each project that we do, we have to initiate the project, we then plan the project, we then execute the project according to the plan. Monitoring and controlling is normally done during execution, and we then close the project, and this is where we accept, or we make sure that the customer has accepted the project, where we do administrative closure, and where we capture lessons learned. So you can see that there is also an overlap between the different processes, because we can't initiate the project, which is basically where we decide what is it that we want to do high level, and we write that into the project charter, and not also have some or other form of monitoring and controlling process that is happening. Then also we plan in the beginning, but as more information becomes available, sometimes during the executing process, we might want to update the plan. So you can see that this is an iterative process where planning and execution become iterations. Okay, so this is where we enter the phase or start the project, and this is where we exit the phase or end the project. So we're going to talk about the different phases in the product life cycle, and then you will understand why we don't say here just start project but also say enter phase. Okay, so the boundaries of the project. So we have a project initiator or sponsor who decides that this project is necessary, and they will then kick off an initiating process of setting up the project charter, and that is then basically where the project boundary starts. We then go through the process, and at the end we then have project deliverables which go to the end user, and we have project records which become process assets within our organization. And the boundary of the project is, as soon as we've finished the deliverables and we've done the project records, our project is over. Okay, so let's look at each of the process groups in more detail. So initiating is the definition of a new project or a new phase of a project, and its main aim is to obtain authorization. We define the initial scope, commit initial resources, and identify stakeholders. We generate the project charter and the stakeholder register in this process group, and then the approved project charter then authorizes the project. And the main thrust of this process is to align the stakeholders' expectations with the project's purpose. So if you remember right at the beginning of this lecture where we had the swing and the tree, during initiation we already want to understand what the stakeholder needs from the projects so that we can deliver the correct output at the end of the day. Then the planning process group, this is where we establish what the total scope of the effort is. We define and refine the objectives and course of action to reach the objectives. So what are the tasks, what are the steps that we have to take in order to reach the objective of the project? So here we develop the project management plan and the project documents to carry out the project, and these relate to scope, time, cost, quality, communications, human resources, risks, procurements, and stakeholder engagement. So in the plan we have to address how we are going to do all of these things that are listed. And then repeated feedback loops may be required as more information becomes available. Remember, we said when we spoke about the process groups that there can be iterations between the planning and the executing process group. Right, and so what we do is we use progressive elaboration. So we plan and document, or planning and documentation are iterative activities. So as more information becomes available, we update the planning. And this is also when we talk about the products and the project life cycle, you will see that that is why we use the life cycle approach where we do the project in phases, so that we don't plan the entire project from A to Z at the start when we don't have all the information available as yet. Okay, then the executing process group. Processes performed to complete the work as defined in the project management plan. It must satisfy, or the work that we do must satisfy the project specification, and it's all about coordinating people, resources, and managing stakeholder expectation. A large portion of the budget will be expended during the executing process group. In fact, that's where most of the budget is expended. Okay, then the monitoring and controlling process group. This is where we track, review, and orchestrate progress and performance of the projects. So it's about controlling changes, recommending corrective or preventive action, and anticipating possible problems, monitoring the ongoing project activities against the project management plan and the project performance measurement baseline, because remember the plan will give us all of that, and then influencing the factors that could circumvent integrated change control or configuration management so that only approved changes are implemented. We accept and we know that no project ever happens 100% according to the original plan. So we are allowed to make changes, but we are only allowed to do it as long as those changes are approved, and there must be change control. So the monitoring and controlling process group is mainly to do with measuring and analysis of project performance at regular intervals. Then the closing process group, this is where we formally complete the project phase or contractual obligation. We have to obtain acceptance by the customer or sponsor. We have to conduct post-project or phase-end reviews, and we need to document that. We need to archive all relevant project documents to be used as historical data. We need to close out all procurement activities and perform team members' assessment and release project resources. And this formally establishes that the project or project phase is complete. Right, so here is a slide that you probably won't be able to read that clearly. But if you go to the PMBOK on page 61, you will find this drawing. And this shows you that project management has certain knowledge areas, and in the certain knowledge areas there are things that have to happen in the different process groups. Okay, so this is just a summary of knowledge areas versus project management process groups. So I have also put in the different knowledge areas just so that you get an idea of what they are. So project integration management, this is where we develop the project charter, develop the project management plan, direct and manage project work, monitor and control project work, perform integrated change control, and close project or phase. Now, project integration management is pretty much covered in this subject, PJP 4080. Then scope management. This is where we plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create the work breakdown structure, validate scope, and control scope. So once again, all of these, or this whole knowledge area is basically covered in PJP 40B 80. Then project time management. Plan schedule management, define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity resources, estimate activity duration, develop schedule, and control schedule. And once again, all of these, or this whole knowledge area is covered in PJP 4080, and you will be doing this for your career day. Then project cost management. Plan cost management, estimate costs, determine budget, and control costs. This is addressed in project accounting, which is scheduled for next semester for most of you. Then project quality management. Plan quality management, perform quality assurance, and control quality. This knowledge area is covered in project quality management, PJQ. Project human resource management. Plan human resource management, acquire project team, develop project team, and manage project team. So this is covered in PRR or project resources. Project communications management, plan communications management, manage communications, and control communications. This is also covered in PRR or project resources. Then project risk management. In this course, in the BTEC project management, we don't go into risk management in a lot of detail. We touch on it in quality management. But the elements of risk management are planned risk management, identify risks, perform qualitative risk analysis, qualitative risk analysis, then perform quantitative risk analysis, plan risk responses, and control risks. And then project procurement management. This is also addressed in PRR or project resources. Plan procurement management, conduct procurements, control procurements, and close procurements. And then the last one, which is a new addition to the 5th edition of the PMBOK, which is project stakeholder management. Identify stakeholders, plan stakeholder management, manage stakeholder engagement, and control stakeholder engagement. So to a certain extent, we will be doing this in PJP 4080, because you will have to identify and manage the stakeholders in your career day project. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is projects and product life cycles. So just as a person has a life cycle, so you're born as a baby and you then go to kindergarten and you then go to grade 1, and hopefully eventually you get a degree and you get married and you have then your own children and you go through the whole life cycle with them. The same is true of a product, and the same is also true of a project. So we will now discuss the project and the product life cycles. Okay, so the first thing we need to look at is if we look at our project over time and we look at the cost and staffing levels, or we can also call this the amount of resources that we are expending, you will see that during the starting phase of the project or the initiation, the cost and staffing is very low. So in other words, we haven't really spent a lot of resources at the end of the initiation when we have the project charter. Then we go into the organizing and preparing, or the planning phase, and the output of that is the project management plan. And you can see that we need more resources here, and we expend more resources here than what we did during initiation. But you will see that carrying out the work or the execution is where most of the project resources are expended. And then one day we have our accepted deliverables, and suddenly everybody goes away from the project team and starts working on other things, and the poor project manager is left with closing the project and archiving the project documentation. And so you can see here we have a decrease in cost and staffing level again. Then the other thing to realize is that if we look at time as the project time goes along, if we change something at the start of the project, so think about our swing example that we had right at the beginning. If the client's need had been specified and had been correctly specified from the beginning, we would have known to buy a rope and a tire, and we would have delivered that. Instead of that, we had all of those changes where we started out with three slats on the swing, and then we chopped the tree down, and then we installed the rope. And so all these changes, as we went along in the project, we made all of these changes, and the further we are along in the project, the more a change will cost us. But the good news is that the stakeholder influence is the highest at the start of the project. So if we can understand at the start of the project what stakeholders want, we are more likely to be able to deliver what they need at the end of the day. The problem is if we don't understand what stakeholders want, and we only understand it if a lot of time has elapsed, the cost of change is so much higher, and so the chances that the stakeholder will still be able to influence the outcome becomes so much less. And then the last thing to realize is the risk and the uncertainty is the highest at the start of the project. Because at the start of the project, we don't know exactly what all the things are that can go wrong. As we go along, we get more information and we understand the project better. Also, as we go along, some of the risks happen and some of them don't happen. So by the nature of it, it means that the risk then decreases as the time goes on. All right, so here we are talking about a generic product life cycle. The reason we use the generic product life cycle is because your product life cycle is dependent on the specific product that you are busy developing. So a generic product life cycle would be something like need identification, where you establish what the need is. Why are we developing the product? Why is it necessary to go from laptop computing to tablets? Is there a need? Will people buy it? Right? Then we go to the concept phase, where we then decide on what it is that we think that this product should be able to do at the end of the day. What are the requirements? What are the stakeholders saying? What do the end users need? Etc., etc. Then once we have a concept and we know what this product must do, we will then go into the design phase. In the design phase, we will then make all the drawings. So if we take the laptop to tablet, in the design phase we will draw up the PC boards. We will decide what type of layout will the screen have, what type of screen will we use, what will the weight be, what will the components be that we need, what type of applications will run on the tablets, etc., etc. Then once everything is designed on paper, we will then go over to development. So development is where we will now start building things. So at the end of the development phase, we will have a production ready prototype. So we will now have a physical tablet that we can demonstrate, that has everything integrated, that has the look and feel and shape and everything of the final tablets that we will be then producing for the market. We will then start producing these tablets. The tablets will then be sold to the customers, who will then operate them. And at the end of operation, there should also then be a plan for how are we going to dispose of the product when it is no longer needed. Okay, so the important thing to realize is that there is a huge difference between your product life cycle and your project management processes. Because what normally happens in terms of your product life cycle is each phase of the life cycle will have a complete project management process happening in it. So in other words, for the need identification, we will have an initiating process that will initiate and say we need to do need identification. We will then plan on how are we going to do the need identification. We will then execute according to the plan, and we will monitor and control this project of need identification. We will then close need identification, where we will then make sure that all our documents are up to date. if we're doing the need identification for a client, we will make sure that the client pays us, and we will then exit the phase of need identification. At this exit point, there is then also a decision point where the client or the sponsor can then decide, all right, based on the results of the need identification, are we going to go on into the concept phase? And if we then decide to go into the concept phase, we will again initiate the concept phase. We will plan how are we going to do the concept phase. We will execute according to the plan. We will monitor and control the concept phase. We will close the concept phase. We will make sure that the whole concept is well documented, that we understand it. If it's done for a client, we will make sure that the client pays us, and we will then exit the phase, and there will then be a decision point where the sponsor or the client will decide whether we want to go on to the next phase, which is then the design phase. And I'm not going to repeat myself, but essentially we will then decide in the design phase, we will then do all the processes for the design phase. We will do all the processes for the development phase. Then remember that production and operation is not part of the project life cycle. So the main difference between the product life cycle and the project life cycle is that in the project life cycle, production and operation is taken out. All right. So this is basically the generic product life cycle. And you will see that your product life cycle is very, very much dependent on the product itself. Sometimes we will manage the project in such a way, or the product in such a way, that it only has one phase. So here we want to install a telecommunications network. So all we are doing is the project of installing the telecommunications network, and there is only one phase. So we initiate, we plan, we execute, we monitor and control, and we close. Here is another example of a project of cleaning up a hazardous waste site. Think about one of the mine dumps outside Johannesburg, where they are currently busy making them nice and planting trees and whatever, so that they don't look so ugly. But so think about it, the first phase would be facility decommissioning, because there might still be some mining equipment, some mining buildings that are still on this mine dump, and so you need to decommission the facility. So to do that, you have a project. You initiate, you plan, you execute, you monitor and control, and you close. So now once all the old mine equipment has been decommissioned, you then want to have waste removal and clean up. So this would be where you would then remove any old equipment that's lying around, any old material that's lying around, and you would clean it up so that only the natural environment is left. So here you would have a project which would be initiated, planned, executed, monitored and controlled, and closed. And then you would then want to plant the trees and the grass and the flowers and make it all pretty, and that would then be the landscaping phase. So this project then has a product life cycle of facility decommissioning, waste removal and cleanup, and landscaping. So you can see that the phases of your project, of your products or your project, is definitely dependent on the type of project that you're busy with. Okay, and then the last thing to realize is that one of the things that we can do to make a project go faster is we can fast track it. And tracking basically means that we do phases in parallel. So here we are building a new factory. So what we do is we say, okay, as soon as we have done the design of the earthworks, you know, now I've completely forgotten the words, but you know, where you dig the foundations, that's the word I was looking for. Okay, so once we've completed the design of the foundations, we immediately go over to construction. All right, so we don't wait until the design of the whole factory is complete and we know exactly you know, what the walls are going to look like and where the windows are going to be and where the doors are going to be and what the roofing is going to be made of. As soon as we've finished the layout of our foundations, we construct. Now, the problem with that is that you can see that it increases our risk, because if we made a mistake in the calculations in the design phase for the foundation, or not even just a mistake, but say, for example, during the design phase, we make assumptions and we say that we are going to use a certain roofing material. And when we get to the detailed design of the roof, we find that that roofing material is not going to work. We need to use something different, and the different roofing is going to weigh a lot more. That will have implications on our foundation, and that means that although we've already finished the foundation, we might have to do some rework on the construction phase. So yes, it has the advantage of doing things faster, but just remember that it means that you are increasing your risk. Okay, and this is just the product development life cycle from the Nicholas and Stein book, which is your prescribed book. So here you can see they talk about your project life cycle and your utilization. All right, so again, need identification and conceptual design, preliminary design, detailed design and development, fabrication and construction. So when you are building a building, remember that construction is part of your project life cycle. Fabrication of your first pre-production item would be part of your project life cycle as well. And then you go over to production if the product is something like a laptop or a tablet, and then you have operational use and support, and then at the end you have system disposal. Okay, so now go and do the slides on project management processes and the project life cycle assessment on My Tutor, and I hope that you have enjoyed the lecture, and I will see you next Monday for the evening students, and next week Friday for the block students. And yeah, and then we will just recap on some of the concepts, but I'm not going to do all the theory in detail. Have a good evening.